Hey guys, this is Vanessa. This is the last video of this Hexter. It's designed to kind of review some of the topics we've been talking about, like GMOs and selective breeding, and also to kind of introduce us to what's coming up next Hexter. In Hexter 6, we'll be talking about things like evolution, cloning, stem cell research, and things like that. So I created a sort of presentation, which hopefully works here, so that we can talk about GMOs and selective breeding. So the question is, GMOs and selective breeding have really changed the course of evolution. Evolution is a natural process, and selective breeding and genetically modified organisms are basically humans stepping in and changing the evolutionary process. So we're going to talk about this idea of genetic variation. So what is genetic variation? It's the idea that within the same species, different organisms will have slightly different genes and characteristics. So these guys are all bivalves, like a type of clam, sort of, or mussel, but you can see they're each slightly different. Same with these potatoes, same with human beings. Human beings share 99.9% of their genetic makeup. We are 99.9% identical. But those little differences in us are really important, and for the most part, they're really good. So where does this genetic variation come from? There are a few different places where genetic variation can occur. So the first is mutations, which we've studied, right? The DNA is copying itself and there's a mistake made, or you're exposed to radiation and your DNA mutates. The second way that we can get genetic variation is through sexual reproduction, right? So if this mommy bunny and this daddy bunny love each other a lot, then what they do is they end up combining their genetics to create a completely unique offspring. So the mixing of genes in sexual reproduction creates sort of a brand new and unique organism. And the third is gene flow. So gene flow is when genetic information moves from one population to another. So these might all be different types of, let's say, sparrows, but we've got these blue-breasted sparrows and these red-breasted sparrows, and they live on different sides of this river, which has made them sort of evolve with slightly different characteristics. So if one of these little blue-breasted sparrows decides to fly over the river and kind of hook up with one of these red-breasted sparrows, then they're combining and mixing their DNA is going to create something brand new again. So those are the three main sources of genetic variation. And then there's this question of, why does that matter? Why do we need genetic variation? Why do we need genetic diversity? One of the main reasons is protection and survival. So if the members of a species all have slightly different genes, and something bad happens, like a disease or a change in habitat or a new predator or something like that, if you have a lot of different varieties of genetics in a species, at least some of those species are likely to be able to adapt and survive that catastrophe, that disease, that change in habitat, that predator. They may not all survive, the individuals may not all survive, but the species is likely to survive if there's more genetic diversity. So, for example, if there were a drought that caused a shortage of food or leaves in an area for giraffes, and if you have a herd of giraffes that are all kind of short-necked versus a herd of giraffes with a variety of neck lengths, right? Short, medium, tall. That herd with the diversity, the different lengths of necks, some of them are going to survive. That giraffe with the taller neck here is going to be able to reach food that would be difficult for the other giraffes to get to, and so at least some of them would survive. And we'll talk about this some more during the process of evolution. Okay. Another example is, let's say you're just growing a field of corn, a monoculture, a single species, and a rust or a fungus or a bacteria invades this field. You could lose all of your corn. Whereas if I was growing a garden or farming with various species, I would be much more likely to I might lose my corn rows here, but I would keep my cabbage and my flowers and my potatoes and whatever else. Something would survive. So having a variety is always going to be better than having just one monoculture, one variety of something. Okay. The other reason genetic variation matters is that it's produced who we are now. So the only reason that all living things aren't just these single-celled bacterial organisms floating around in the ocean is that there have been mutations, gene flow, and sexual reproduction over the last 3.5 billion years. So one mutation at a time, one combination of genes at a time, we have evolved and grown into the billions of species that exist now. So you can see we all started out here, little floaty bacteria in the ocean, and then over time things get more and more and more diverse and beautiful and amazing, and that's a good thing. So genetic variation is important, and we'll learn more about that later. So we've been talking about selective breeding a bit and also GMOs. And selective breeding has allowed humans to do a couple of things. For about 10,000 years, humans have been picking the best crops, the strongest, the hardiest, the best tasting, and we have been breeding them with each other to create what we consider better and better crops, okay? Or in some cases, better and better animals, the biggest cow, the fattest pig, whatever. So that has helped us feed ourselves and stabilize and grow as a species. And it's created some really great, plant and animal products, but it also reduces the abundance of genetic diversity. So if I don't like a certain type of trait, I get rid of it through selective breeding, and that means that we have fewer types of traits in crops and animals than we did thousands of years ago. And that's not a good thing. All right. Here's why that's a problem very specifically. So the Irish potato famine of 1845 struck Ireland. It lasted 4 years. And if you look to the right, we've got this diagram. And this is what happened. The Irish farmers had become completely dependent on this one species of potato. It was called the Irish lumper, which worked for a long time because it had all sorts of nutrients. It fed sort of the poorer peasant population and it had, basically everything they needed. So it was miraculous in some ways, but what happened is this disease called a blight, which is sort of a fungus, swept through Ireland, and this Irish lumper potato is very susceptible to it. So farmers would pull the potato up and it would look black and rotten, and it would smell so bad that people were just vomiting in the fields. So you couldn't eat them. And over the course of those 4 years, it wiped out 3/4 of the potatoes in Ireland. And as a result, 1 million people died of starvation and 1 million more had to flee. A lot of them fled to the US. Ireland didn't have a huge population in 1845. So that's a lot of the Irish population that died or left. However, if the Irish farmers had had a more diverse crop, 3 or 4 or 5 different types of potatoes, when that blight had struck, these Irish lumpers here and here would have rotted. And that would have been bad, but they still would have had lots of potatoes to feed the population, and it wouldn't have been nearly as devastating. So that's why genetic diversity is important, all right? We haven't learned much from this, I'm afraid, over the years. Because now we engage in a lot of monoculture and have reduced genetic diversity even more through something called GMOs. So GMOs, much like selective breeding, they're selected for the best traits, but they reduce genetic diversity. And they result in monocultures, which put entire crops in danger of being wiped out because you end up with field upon field of the same species. Now, 75% of the world depends on just 6 crops. rice, wheat, corn, potatoes, soybeans, and cassava. So let's say that a really deadly wheat disease spread throughout the world, you could end up with almost 1 billion people being affected by that directly, like starvation and complete and utter crash of their food system. So GMOs are a pretty mixed bag, as you guys know, but that monoculture thing it's definitely an issue. I think it's maybe the biggest issue with GMOs. Now, why are GMOs even possible? Because when you look at GMOs, you're talking about transferring genes between completely different species. Like, there are mice that have had genes from luminescent jellyfish inserted into their DNA so they glow in the dark. I got this wrong. I should say mice. Mice and jellyfish are really different, so how can that happen? And it works because the genetic code of every living thing is written in the exact same and relatively simple language of C's, T's, G's, and A's, right? So it doesn't matter if you are a bacteria or a sequoia tree or a blue whale or a rat or a banana. Everybody, every living thing on Earth has the same code that codes for what we're going to be and look like and how we're going to function. So we can steal a little bit of this code and put it in something else because it's in the same language, and that's pretty amazing. That's all I've got for you guys for now, but we will be launching into, like I said, how all these things affect diversity of life, how they affect all sorts of evolutionary processes, and how we do something similar to this when we're talking about cloning and stem cell research. We use some of the same concepts to do some rather controversial cloning and stem cell research. That's it. I hope you have a lovely spring break, and I'll talk to you soon.